All right, so we've talked about game mechanics, and now let's talk a little bit about game rules and how we come up with the rules that form our mechanics. So rules can be made of controls, constraints, verbs, and objects. So there are a lot of different ways to define and document these rules, and the following are just some ideas worth considering as starting points. I'm not really too fussy about how you write your GDD and about how you decide, how to communicate your rules. But if you like to have the structure, this part of the lecture will sort of provide that structure for you. So as a little reminder about the game system diagram, this is potentially a pretty helpful starting point for thinking about the rules. So you can feel free to use it or something similar in your own concept maps if you want to. So recall that we have an input, which is a control. So that might be like the press of a button, for example. We'll say the player presses A. And that leads into a rule written by the game program, or written in the game program, where it might say when a player presses A, the character will perform an attack. At that point, there is some kind of feedback that's given back to the player. So you could say the player presses A, the character will attack, we will show a character attack animation. That's your feedback. And from there, the player can see that their character attacked, and they can determine what to do next at that point. Maybe that, did some damage to an enemy. They know that they have to attack an enemy and do damage, and that will drop a health bar, and that's eventually going to cause something that they like gaining XP. So in terms of controls, this could be keys, mouse, buttons, joystick, finger, tap, gesture, pressure, footstep, eye track, voice, breath, and many more ways to actually measure a control. Most of the time you're probably going to be using mouse and keyboard, and maybe joystick and buttons. But there's a whole gamut of control systems that you can use. I did once play a game where the control system was sitting on a couch and standing up. And you had to do it in quick succession, and it would give you feedback by yelling at you. It was pretty fun. So controls refer to how the player makes inputs. Make a decision so that you have something to test, but know that this will change as you get a sense of game feel when you and others play. So what I want you to do in part of your mechanics assignment is I do want you to tell me what the main controls are for the core mechanics in your game. So you have to assign, if you're using a controller, I do want you to assign the buttons and basically give me a table of the controls. So if I show you my controller, you can assign the face buttons, you can assign the 2 analog sticks, you can assign the D-pad, there's all the buttons on top. There's a lot that you can choose from here, or you can use a keyboard and mouse, but I do want you to tell me what the controls are actually going to be for all of the rules in your core mechanic. So constraints. So these are your lines on the playground. If you think back to that magic circle sort of example where all games are essentially a boundary within which you agree to follow the rules. This is the lines on the playground. So how are your player and your rules bounded in space and time? Though these are not necessarily rules or game mechanics in and of themselves, you do have to define your constraints, both for your design and for the player. That's helpful for formulating the rest of your rules. So you could have timers. So there are certain games where things, time counts down, and that's an important concept for the game, is that you have to perform an action within a particular time limit. There might be a play area, so it could be levels, a map. If you think of a chessboard or a field or something like that, you can tell me in your document, this is what I expect the play area to be. I expect the game to be divided into levels, or I expect the game to be, open world with loading screens between each area, or whatever it may be. There's physics. So physics is a form of constraint, right, in terms of gravity and collision. So where can your player go in the world? If they can jump, how high can they jump? You can make some decisions about that pretty early, and it's always subject to change, right? And the camera, the way that the camera moves is also a form of constraint. So whether it's a 2D game, 3D, isometric, There are going to be places that the camera itself can and can't go. And those are decisions that you can start to make as well. So now we get into the nitty gritty of like the meat of your game mechanics, as this is the area, the verbs are the area where allowable player actions occur. So this could be movement, like running, jumping, traversing space. And again, you can assign a control to each of those things. There's abilities like fighting, healing, sneaking, talking, unlocking, stealing, giving and selling. Those are like the main, they could be the main verbs in your game, right? I think a lot of your games are probably going to involve combat. So if combat is one of your pillars, then I expect to see some mechanics related to that. If one of your pillars is, complex dialogue trees or like player choice, you want like the player to have a higher degree of choice around their personality, then probably you're going to have dialogue mechanics, and I'd like to see how you're planning on implementing that. And then choices, choosing words, choosing solutions, choosing paths. If you're making a puzzle game, then your verb might be around the way that you can actually complete the puzzle. So that might be like pushing blocks on a tile grid, for example. And then you can also determine what your players may not do. And this may also form, sort of part of your core. This allows you to control your scope, stay true to your pillars and theme. So this might be like a valuable exercise as well. So for example, if your pillar is about nonviolent stealth, like it's a stealth game and you want the player to sneak around, the core experience is supposed to be the feeling of sneaking and feeling clever and like you're staying hidden and that sort of thing. Consider disallowing combat so that if you're seen at all, that's it. That's like game over. I think Limbo is like that. This is maybe a little complicated term, reciprocal influence. So what or who is the recipient of the verbs you chose? So for each of those verbs that you defined, you can decide, like you can write this into your document, what does that verb affect? So if your verb is fighting, is like, I'm going to have a shooting mechanic, for example, does that affect an NPC, another player, an enemy, oneself? Does it affect a space? So, does it open a door? Does it change the environment in some way? Is the environment, if it's shooting, is the environment destructible? So is this going to can you shoot through a wall? Objects, so chests, items, equipment. So if you shoot another player, does it degrade their equipment? Is that a thing that you're like interested in doing? Can you shoot open a chest? And story, does it have consequences? So if you shoot an NPC, does that mean you can like never talk to that NPC or like buy certain things? Or there's like a lot of different ways that the actions that your character or your player performs have an influence on things in the game. So you can start to make those decisions as well. And if you can imagine putting all of this into a table, I feel like that would be very helpful for you and for me. And finally, there are objects. So these are not rules per se, but this is like just giving me a list, like enumerating all of the in-game items or objects can be helpful. So you could give me a short list for your prototype of what all of the key items are going to be that your player has to pick up in order to complete the demo. You could give me a list of like, let's say 3 power-ups and what their effect on the character is going to be. You could tell me what the features of a puzzle are. Or if your game involves a lot of locks and keys, which is like a fairly common design concept, you could say, I'm planning on having, 4 locks, and this is approximately where I'm going to put the 4 keys, etc. Locks and keys do not always have to literally be locks and keys, by the way, but it could be something like that. And then finally, you can have a section for economy. So economy is where you're going to talk about like game balance and currencies. I include in the concept of currencies stuff like XP, so experience points. Anything that like ticks up and that your player can spend sort of falls in this region. But this is a pretty complicated topic, so we're going to cover this in its whole own lecture next week.